A few years ago, I decided to make a change in my life. I had just gotten divorced and wanted to escape it all for a while, so I decided to take a road trip on my own to clear my head and de-stress myself. I wanted to explore a new city to see if I might possibly move there. I'd been living in the small town of Kellogg, Idaho, but was considering moving to Seattle. Everyone knows your business in small towns, and I wanted to get away from all the old memories and from my ex-husband's large extended family. I decided to drive out on a Friday evening and spend a few days exploring Seattle. Little did I know that my adventure would turn into a nightmare. The drive was uneventful at the outset. I had decided to leave late enough to avoid rush hour through Spokane, which would make it a far less stressful drive. I wanted everything about this trip to be relaxing. Washington has magnificent forests and beautiful back road vistas. As I drove through Spokane, I saw the sign for the turnoff ahead to Route 2, which would be the longer but more scenic route. The darker, lonelier drive would also be less congested, with far fewer annoying headlights. I need to get back out into nature, I thought to myself as I reached the junction. I turned onto Route 2 and rolled down the windows. It was a cool spring night. I had an Airbnb rented for my stay. It was a house in Kenmore, just north of Seattle. I'd been checking out towns and neighborhoods from Idaho, but nothing's as good as exploring a new city in person. Miles and miles of forest also means tons of deer standing on the side of the road grazing. I was straining more and more to see their eyes shine in the darkness. I definitely didn't want to hit a deer out here in the middle of the night. About 3 hours out from Spokane, it was late in the evening, my eyes were getting dry and tired of scanning the long, dark, and mostly deserted highway. Route 2 is so much quieter than I-90, the highway most people would take to cross the state. There were very few cars on the road now, and I hadn't seen a gas station or signs of civilization for miles. The only thing lighting my way was my headlights and the sound of the lonely road beneath my tires. I was getting restless and sleepy, so I turned up the radio and started singing along in an effort to keep sleep away. I drove for about another 40 miles, and I was ready to pull over and sleep for just a few hours. I knew this was a horrible idea, so I kept going. There's bound to be a motel or a rest stop ahead. Another 20 miles or so down the road, I was getting desperate. No amount of coffee could keep me awake, and I was terrified I'd drive off the road and wreck. I was just about to pull over when I saw something in the distance. It was a flicker of light. I assumed it was a sign of civilization, maybe a small town or a business with a parking lot where I could catch a few minutes of sleep. As I got closer, I realized it was a small motel. I was just outside of Kashmir, but I still felt like I was out in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't the perfect place to stop for the night, but I was thankful it was there. I decided to pull over and stay. I parked, got my small bag out of the trunk, and walked through the dark parking lot to the office door. The bell over the door rang as I entered the office. The motel was old, run down, and smelled of mold, but I was exhausted and just needed a few hours of sleep to feel better. The walls were dark brown wood on either side of the desk, and a taxidermy bobcat crouched above the desk. An ashtray on the counter betrayed the motel's age. The receptionist greeted me with an angry look. She was a mean-looking older woman with glasses. Her name tag read, Jane. She was not happy to see me. I could hear the sound of the TV coming from the room behind the desk, and apparently I'd interrupted her show. "It's late," she hissed. There was absolute hatred in her eyes. I was so surprised by her reaction, it caught me totally off guard. Just one night, I'll be gone in the morning," I stammered. She rolled her eyes and stood staring at me for a good 5 seconds. Then, suddenly, her expression changed. With a creepy smile, she turned and reached for a key behind her. She handed me the key and told me my room was at the end of the outdoor corridor. The key was attached to a large yellow plastic keychain with the number 6 on it. "Sorry for the trouble," I said awkwardly. Jane just smiled and watched me leave. What a peach, I thought to myself. As I walked towards my room, I scanned the parking lot. There was one other car parked directly in front of a room with closed curtains. I couldn't see any lights on in the room, but it was late. All the other rooms were vacant, their curtains drawn wide open, gaping into dark windows. I heard the bell from the office door as I reached the end of the corridor. I heard steps behind me, and I thought it must be my sweet new friend, Jane, maybe coming after me to be nasty again. But when I turned, the corridor was empty. Only my shadow was behind me. I convinced myself that it was just the sound of the wind. I must be really exhausted, I thought to myself. I reached room 6 and turned the key in the door. It was completely dark. I let my eyes adjust to the darkness and stepped inside. I fumbled for the light switch and finally found it. It turned on the lamp by the bed, and I looked around. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The room was so cold, I could almost see my breath. I clutched my light jacket tightly around me and looked for the temperature controls. The AC was on, but it was only set to low. I turned the dial to heat and put my bag down. The room was every bit as cheesy as you'd expect. The bedspread was a plain tan color, the walls were dark brown wood, and there was an old TV in the corner. It doesn't matter. A quick shower and sleep, and this place will be a distant memory. It can always be worse, I thought to myself. I turned on the bathroom's dim overhead light and pulled some clean clothes and my shampoo out of my bag. I turned on the water and waited for it to get warmer. As it did, I stepped into the tub and finally started feeling more relaxed. I was finally off the road. I'd get some sleep and tomorrow get to Seattle. I took a long, relaxing shower, and just as the water started to lose its warmth, I felt something on my back, moving up my spine. I swiped at my back and I hit something crunchy. Something landed in the tub at my feet. It was a cockroach. I stepped back and hopped out of the tub. My skin was crawling. Oh, I hate cockroaches, and this one had been on my back. I quickly got dressed, but my skin was still crawling. I was so creeped out. My mind was racing. I tried convincing myself that it was just a bug and nothing more. I reached carefully into the tub and turned the water off. Roach was gone, but I don't think I killed it. I was so tired now, my eyes were heavy. I got into the bed, but I couldn't shake that feeling of unease. The room was eerily silent, and my mind was tense again. What a strange turn this trip had taken. I looked forward to morning when I could get back on the road. I kept the light on and tried to close my eyes and fall asleep. A few minutes later, I heard a scratching sound. Was I dreaming it? I turned over to look at the clock. It had only been a couple of minutes. I was actually hearing this. At first I thought maybe it was the roach in the bathroom, but the sound was way too loud. It sounded like an animal scratching rhythmically on the walls. It was getting louder, and now my heart was pounding in my ears. I got up and checked the window, but there was nothing out there. I got out of bed to listen. As I walked around the room, the noise stopped. I got back into bed, and it started again. I was starting to get really scared. I closed my eyes and heard something else. It was a faint whispering that seemed to be coming from inside the room. My eyes slammed open, and I tried listening more closely, but the more I listened, the more indistinct it became. It was coming from all around me now. I wasn't alone in this room, but I couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, the lights went out and everything went dark. I could hear someone breathing in the darkness, and it wasn't me. I started to panic and tried to turn my phone's flashlight on, but I couldn't find the button. I felt something wet and cold touch my cheek, and I screamed. I could feel a pair of cold, strong hands around my neck, trying to strangle me. In that moment, I knew there was something evil in this room with me. This feeling of hands around my neck went on for what seemed like hours. I couldn't move. I was trapped in some sort of in-between world. I remember thinking that I'd be found here in this awful place and nobody would know what happened to me. The cold touch on my face came and went. There was no warmth there. This thing that was trying to take my life was not human. I was paralyzed and even worse, silent. I couldn't cry out, and I couldn't hear anything but my pounding heart and the scratching sounds and whispers all around me. I was held down by some immovable, invisible, dark force. I was terrified and alone. I saw nothing but darkness after my phone screen timed out. I don't remember what happened that night, but the next thing I knew, I woke up in the tub of the motel bathroom. I was freezing and soaked. My clothes were soaked and the water was still running. I must have fallen and hit my head trying to turn off the water, I thought to myself. That horrible night, everything I'd experienced wasn't real. I was stiff and sore from being in that tub, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought I could have drowned in that tub. Stupid bug, I thought to myself. I got changed and cleaned myself up. I was going to have to explain this mess to that nightmare of a receptionist, Jane. I packed my stuff and opened the door to the room. I went to my car and put my bag in the trunk. I started towards the motel office and noticed a police car and an ambulance pulling into the parking lot. The office was quiet, and I hoped there was a new receptionist working now. "Hello?" I called out. Jane came out of the back room with a creepy smile on her face. "How was your night?" She looked at me sideways, grinning horribly. I didn't sleep well. I actually fell in the tub, and I think I passed out. I'm okay, but there's an awful mess in the bathroom. She looked me straight in the eyes with a nasty grin on her face and said, "Oh, they're already cleaning up the mess." She pointed to the emergency crews parked outside room 6. Her sickening smile was getting bigger. I was stunned, and I couldn't understand. I stepped backwards and out of the office. I walked towards the room I had just left. Nobody stopped me as I approached the doorway. I looked into the room and saw the lifeless body of a woman, my body, on the bed. As I stood in horror, I heard a policeman say, "It's another Jane Doe for now." I turned and looked at the motel office. Jane was standing in the doorway, laughing. If you enjoyed that story, I'm glad you found me. I tell creepy stories about scary encounters and paranormal events. If this is your thing too, stay, listen, and subscribe to Lady Grimm for more stories. It's okay to keep the lights on. Let me tell you another story. The sun was setting over the Hungarian mountains as I set up camp with my friends Sarah and Jackie. We had been backpacking across Europe for weeks, and were getting into the groove of finding safe campsites or youth hostels pretty quickly. This was going to be an early night for us since we were tired and had a big day of hiking planned for the next day. Our group of 3 was super excited to see more of Hungary. We had heard some amazing spooky stories about the country. Aside from the legend of Dracula, the country has a mystical air to it, rich in culture and stories. As we sat around the campfire, we admired the night sky, full of stars. We laughed and shared ghost stories we'd heard about these very mountains. Maybe it was just the stories or the thick woods, but something felt off. The air was getting chilly as the night wore on, and a strange stillness settled over our campsite. Even the wind had died down. We looked at each other and laughed. Jackie, always the first to make a joke, said, "You guys are killing me. I'm actually getting creeped out." We laughed and shifted nervously, but something did feel off. We just couldn't quite put a finger on what it was. Somewhere behind me, we heard the sounds of branches snapping in the woods, just past the tree line. It sounded like something large was moving towards us. We sat still and breathless, just listening, hoping it wasn't a bear, or worse. As quickly as it had approached, the sounds of movement in the woods faded away, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. "It must have been a deer," I said. "Or maybe it was a bear," Sarah said, looking worried. "Well, whatever it was, it's gone now," I said. We tried to shake off the nervousness of the moment and continued to tell stories, each one scarier than the last. Maybe that was what kept us on edge, or the thought that something was moving in the woods, and while it was now aware of us, we didn't know what it was. It was pretty dark now, and the fire was starting to get low. As we headed to our tents for sleep, I decided to go pee before bed. I went into the trees just away from the campsite. As I turned to head back towards the fading fire, I thought I saw a silhouette of a figure in the distance. I stopped and stared, blinking hard to focus. Whatever it was, it faded from view like a mist, and I stood in silence watching the dark space where it had just been moments before. Had I just seen someone in the woods? Or were our ghost stories just dancing on my nerves? I reached the campsite and told Sarah and Jackie what I saw. "Oh, you're seeing ghosts now," Jackie laughed. "My stories are good." She and Sarah started laughing, and I started to argue, but then it did make sense. It had to just be the stories getting to me. We got settled in our tents and went to sleep pretty quickly. I don't even remember falling asleep. I was so tired. The next morning, I woke up to find Jackie and Sarah were missing. The campsite was empty. The fire was cold and their tents were empty. What was going on? All their gear was here, but they were just gone. I frantically searched around the campsite and at the edge of the trees, but there was no trace of them. I called out to them repeatedly, but only heard the echo of my own voice. I sat for a few minutes trying to get fully awake and understand what was going on. Where could they have gone? It wasn't like them to just leave without telling me. 3 women backpacking through Europe stuck together, or at the very least, we would tell each other if we were leaving the group for a few hours. I was starting to panic, and that's never good when you're in the mountains. I took a deep breath and packed my gear. I had to see if I could track them. Maybe one of them was hurt and they had to leave in a rush. But that wasn't a comforting thought. As I made my way through the forest, I started feeling like I was being watched. It's a primal feeling, one that's unlike anything else. You just know. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I turned around to find no one behind me. I tried to calm myself down and keep walking, but the feeling only intensified. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a light whisper in my ear that made me jump. I turned around, but there was nobody there. It sounded like it was inches from my neck, but there was nothing there I could see. The voice had been soft and faint, like it was coming from the wind. I stopped and looked all around me. It was just me and the trees. I kept walking. I walked about a mile further into the woods, calling for Jackie and Sarah, but there was nothing but my own echo. I stopped calling when I noticed I couldn't hear any birds or forest sounds now. Maybe it was because I was straining to hear beyond the silence, but I became aware of a strange noise all around me. My footsteps echoed hollowly through the trees, and the rustling of leaves sounded like whispers. I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes and turned, but whichever way I turned, there was only stillness. After about another half-mile of walking, I saw Jackie's familiar red jacket. My eyes strained to focus. It was them! "Hey!" I called, expecting them to turn around at the sound of my voice. They were standing still like statues, their backs turned to me. Something was off. I called to them again, but they still didn't respond. As I got closer, and then in front of them, I saw they were completely unresponsive to my presence. They looked out into the woods past me, mouths open and eyes blank and lifeless. My heart started racing as I tried to snap my friends out of this whatever this trance was. I shook them, but it had no effect. I was scared beyond belief and felt the urge to run. As the thought went through my mind, my friend suddenly looked up behind me. Before I could take a step, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder, so strong it whipped me backwards and around. I was now face to face with a ghostly figure, hollow, gaping holes where eyes should be staring into my face. The figure was transparent and appeared to be floating off the ground. I screamed and struggled to break free from the spirit's grasp. It had me tightly. All around me, I could hear whispers again and sounds that became a lullaby. I couldn't understand the language, but it made my blood run cold. I was frozen in terror. I stood locked in that moment, the woods, my friends, everything else collapsing around me. It was just me and the eerie sounds of this ghost. Nothing else existed. I don't know how long I was trapped there. Moments, hours, time stood still. The ghost figure eventually released her grip on my shoulder, and I fell to the ground panting and shaking. When I looked back up, the figure was gone, and so were my friends. The day's light was fading. I knew I had to get out of there fast. How long had I been there? I ran as fast as I could through the forest, the echoes of my footfalls chasing me. All around me I heard the whispers and the ghostly lullaby. I was so terrified. I had lost my bearing and was now just running headlong away from something I couldn't outrun. My heart was going to explode in my chest. I felt like it was in a never-ending nightmare. Suddenly, a bright light illuminated the forest behind me, casting long, eerie shadows. I turned around to see the ghostly figure again, but this time she was flanked by two other shadowy spirits. There was no mistaking them. It was Jackie and Sarah, as blank and hollow as the spirit between them. They were all whispering the lullaby at once, their voices blending together in a terrifying melody. I screamed and turned again to run. Everything hurt. I couldn't catch my breath as I dodged trees in the fading light. They weren't following, but I could hear the whispers and the lullaby still. The sounds were getting softer as I ran. I finally reached the edge of the forest and collapsed onto the dirt road under the moonlight. I had never been so relieved to hear crickets and the sounds of the night forest. As I caught my breath, I realized that my friends were probably gone forever. How could I explain what happened to Jackie and Sarah? I don't even know what happened to them. I stumbled down the dark road, keeping as far as possible from the trees. Behind me, I saw headlights and a car slowed as it passed me. Then it stopped. The window rolled down and I looked up to see a young woman. "Do you need a ride?" she asked with a thick accent. I had lost my gear and was cold with sweat, feeling completely desperate to get out of there. "Yeah." I stumbled to the car and collapsed into the seat. "You shouldn't be out here. This forest is cursed," she said. She turned her head, looking directly at me, and smiled. I turned and stared back at her, suddenly feeling like I wasn't crazy. What do you mean?" I asked her. "She always gets us once we've seen her." She started accelerating towards the trees, but kept her eyes on me. I stared at her in horror as she hummed the spirit's haunting lullaby.